This was the hardest joint I ever had to TIG weld. And not only did I have to learn it in a hurry, but I had to do it without making any mistakes. And if I didn't get it fast enough, I sure as heck wasn't gonna get the job as a TIG welder in my shop anytime soon. Most people who watch my show regularly know that I've been a production TIG welder for about 20 years now. And when I got into the trade, I had a lot of learning to do in a hurry. I was fighting for a spot to be one of the welders in my shop, and this joint that we're gonna go over today was the one that almost sent me packing. As we can see by the material we are working with here, this is a 6000 series aluminum. And it's a type of extrusion with a lot of different shapes and angles to it. Not to mention both pieces are cut on a really weird angle, which obviously when put together will make some areas thicker than others. Even though these two pieces are supposed to fit together with a good angle, we can see that when they do connect together, there's actually some areas that don't even meet up that properly. So what this joint actually is the bottom corner of a soccer goal. I have literally welded thousands of these over the course of my career when I was first getting going. They were a ton of fun to learn because they were so difficult, and they prepared me for so many other joints to learn later down the road. So when taking a look at this diagram here, we can see that obviously there are some areas that are thicker where the two surfaces converge to meet one another, and some areas when they meet together are paper thin. So let's go ahead, fire the machine up, get it set up. I'm gonna set the machine for way more amperage than I actually need. I got 180 amps on the panel here. My frequency set at about 120 hertz. My balance is about 30% positive. Other than that, pretty straightforward settings. So first up, we're gonna make sure that everything is clean. We're gonna give it a good wipe down. And now when I put the pieces together, I wanna tack it with tacks that are actually the exact same size as the profile and shape of the weld that I want to go over it. I don't want to add too much filler material so that I end up with something crazy I have to deal with later. I want the weld to be consistent when I go to do that whole portion. When I was first learning to do this joint, I always struggled with the tacking phase. Obviously, when I was doing this, it was held in a jig. The jig obviously held things in a proper position. It was a little more comfortable to assemble and tack together, but it was still tricky. My main problem with tacking was always adding too much filler material and putting tacks in the wrong places. When I did this, when I went to weld over top of it, it would make my weld look lopsided and uneven. So making each tack as accurate to the profile that I want. Once it's all done, we're gonna hit it with the wire brush. And when I'm wire brushing this, I'm gonna keep in mind that a lot of these actually aren't even gonna get painted. They remain an aluminum finish. So I'm gonna take the same care with wire brushing as I would with welding it. I wanna wire brush correctly in one direction, and I wanna keep it in line with the joint. I don't wanna wire brush off to the sides of the area I'm gonna weld or across the joint itself. When we wire brush something, we want to do it correctly so it gives us a clean surface, and it also leaves our aluminum pieces in good condition. So I take all the time to make things perfect at this stage, so you arguably can't even see this stuff when I finish. All right, now it's time to light up. So when I'm starting to weld it, I usually always start in this area here. The main thing will be starting back far enough to get a proper blend to the start. This way, when I tie into it later from the other side, both welds are connected properly. You can see I'm currently trying to deal with two uneven surfaces. It's kind of like a fillet joint, but because there's a gap in between the two surfaces, this one's completely different. The tricky thing about this pass is not only do I have to deal with uneven surfaces, I can't really see it properly. Because the weld changes planes a couple times, it goes in, goes across, and comes back out, I can't see that well. So one trick I always did was this. I always bent my filler rod, and I was actually able to bend it the perfect amount every time so that when I finished this joint, there would be no bent material left on the filler rod. I had it pretty dialed. In this way, using a bent filler rod, I can keep my filler rod hand out of my face. Once I had my hand out of the way so I could see properly, I could now deal with the changing surfaces. All right, a nice finish there, and get set up for the next pass. Okay, this is where it starts to get fun. One of my big challenges about this section here, going over the pipe itself, was getting consistent and uniform width. Keeping my stepping distance, my overall width and profile really consistent was something I worked at a lot when I first started this joint. When doing this type of stuff, controlling my width and my overall profile would always be the most important thing I focus on when doing something like this. Now check it out as I approach this tack that I have made earlier. See how as I terminate on it, my profile is pretty much the exact same? This type of stuff all came from a proper setup and from a proper tacking procedure. Now picking up here, we can see the profile is the exact same as I carry on, and all I have to do is maintain consistency of all my details again. Now this is when it gets a little bit tricky. Look at the diagram again. We can now see as we progress into this area how thin the material is. One of the main things about this area I struggled with was keeping a profile that wasn't overfilled or too proud. All right, now it's time to set up for the second half. Now look what I do here. I actually start my next pass from the start of the first pass. This is why the beginning of the first one was so important. There's actually times where I would have a problem leaving a little gap or a void in between these two passes because I couldn't see back far enough to actually ensure that I was connecting the two passes. That's why it's so important to leave yourself a good start for the second half way back at the start. So as you can see here, look at this. Look at how much I've dug into the base material with my weld. See this? The main thing that happens when somebody is welding something this thin, it's very common that they will become a little bit shy and back off the heat to prevent burning through. However, the key is actually more about keeping your heat up because we want proper penetration. The real thing to remember is the amount of filler you are putting in. So the problem with this could be adding not enough filler so the weld falls hollow. Penetration is only good if you have the reinforcement on top of it to counteract the heat input. But as we can see here, the profile is just fine. We have no overfilling and nothing has fallen hollow or flat. We have good reinforcement and we're gonna have good penetration on the other side. Now, once I match my profile and width, I begin moving. And again, all I'm doing is controlling my profile as I move, and I get ready to deal with wrapping things up at the end here. There's always a lot of people that used to tell me I should do this in one direction. However, the main reason I wanted to try it this way is so I could hide my button on the very bottom of the piece. This way, the weld would look uniform from the top, and I would be able to hide my button at the end to create symmetry with the joint. All right, now it's all wrapped up. Let's take a look. We can see that the profile of the start was pretty much bang on right away. I'm happy with that. Both of our starts are connected properly. The size and consistency looks great as they head away from one another. Now, getting into this tricky area here, the fillet joint actually isn't too bad. Considering the absolute train wreck I had to fill in, this ended up turning out pretty good. Going around the radius of the pipe now, my weld is a consistent width, my stepping is consistent, and my filler amount is appropriate to the size of the weld that I'm doing. As I start to work towards the thinner material, we don't see any overfill at all, and the profile stays prone and round with the joint. Now, looking here as our passes converge for the button to finish it, everything looks symmetrical and centered for the most part. And now, moment of truth, let's take a look at the inside. We can see that the penetration was absolutely adequate here. Wherever I did my start stops, we can see that everything was connected properly on the inside as well as the outside. This joint had me in all kinds of trouble when I started, but learning a lot of these things is really important. It's like I teach my students. We work on all this stuff as far as the fundamentals go at the beginning of my program. My online TIG welding program focuses on all the right joints and exercises that will warm somebody up properly to give a project like this a really good run for its money. We talked about how important your setup was. If you're not set up properly, no matter what joint you're doing, you're shooting yourself in the foot before you even get started. When I finish a project like this, I want it to look as good as possible. If we don't have a setup or a tacking job that is done well, there's a ton of problems that are gonna happen. This is the next episode to watch here. This is gonna help you consider all of these things. Do a random act of kindness for a stranger today. For Pacific Arc TIG Welding, my name is Dusty. Bill and Chill, we will talk soon. Peace.